The UN has a hidden role in the covenant with the many, and it's happening now. And this is all explained to us in the book of Psalms. The covenant with the many, the mega agreement that launches the 7-year tribulation or 70th week of Daniel, the final 7 years before the return of Jesus. It may be a 2024 agreement being proposed by the United Nations. If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, you know the old saying. And certainly, this covenant is starting to look like what we should be expecting. But frankly, I'd like a little more biblical evidence, and I bet you would too, for something this important, something that would launch the tribulation. There aren't too many things in the end times more important. God says in Amos 3:7 that he does nothing without first telling his holy prophets. So biblical confirmation is necessary in my mind, and I think it's there, but finding it is the hard part. When I'm looking for a prophecy, I always look in the Torah first. And the account of Nimrod in Genesis jumps out as a possibility. Nimrod, of course, was the founder of the first worldwide system of governance that's recorded in the Bible. He was responsible for organizing the Tower of Babel as a direct disobedience to God's commands to Noah to fill the earth. They wanted to stay in one place, and they also wanted to build it as a protection against a future flood, which obviously God had already promised he wouldn't do. So they didn't believe God and didn't want to obey him. Now, the name Babel itself means gate of the gods. So I have to ask myself, what gods were they summoning at that spot? It obviously wasn't the one true God, so idolatry was involved as well. As you know, the European Union has built its parliament building to intentionally look like the Tower of Babel. And their slogan, many tongues, one voice, hints at trying to undo God's punishment of dividing the languages. So for all these reasons, Nimrod and the tower look like a parable for the coming future government, but that's not going to satisfy the biblical confirmation I'm looking for, because there were no nations at that time. This is before the division of the world into governments. So it isn't a picture of anything the United Nations is doing. So I kept looking through the Bible for accounts that show a worldwide group of nations, all coming against God and frankly against all of God's people. And all the nations, that's a phrase that recurs in the end times over and over. Zechariah 12:3, all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it, meaning Jerusalem. Zechariah 14:2, for I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. Joel 3:2, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. There I will enter judgment with them. And Revelation 16:14, for they are spirits of demons, performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. So there are plenty of passages about all the nations being involved in a process of attacking Israel. But how does all this start? Thinking like this brought me to an obvious passage in Psalms that you might actually be aware of, Psalm 2. Let's listen to it. Why are the nations in an uproar, and the peoples devising a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, which means his Messiah, saying, let's tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us. Psalm 2:1-3. This verse has a lot to say that points to the initial source of what is eventually fulfilled in Zechariah, Joel, and Revelation. As I began to consider this, it became obvious to me that since the day King David wrote those words in this psalm until just very recently, there hasn't been an opportunity for this to be fulfilled. Think about it. When has there ever been a time when all the people of all the nations and all the kings of the earth all took counsel together? This isn't just about, a couple Middle East nations, Europe, or any limited number of nations, but it's about all of them. And in our world today, who is all the nations, if not the UN? So until the formation of the United Nations, we never had an opportunity for this passage to be fully fulfilled. This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and that, of course, is one of the reasons that you follow this channel, because we give you insights like this that you just don't get elsewhere, and help put the pieces of what's going to happen in the future together based on passages in the Bible from Genesis to Psalms to Revelation. And if you would like to continue to get this type of insight, subscribe to the channel. Psalm 2 is also a famous passage quoted and explained in the book of Revelation at the time of the 7th trumpet. So I think we've found our prophetic passage about what is going to happen. We just have to dig into it and find out what it means. Now, King David saw a prophetic vision of the future when the people of the Gentile nations would become enraged. They would be angry and saying they want a vain thing, a hopeless thing, something that just can't be achieved. So they're going to be angry and they want something that they really won't be able to get. At the same time, the kings of these nations are assembling together and taking a stand against God and his Messiah, his anointed. The word council in this passage literally means to sit close together, as in the UN General Assembly. So I know we're looking at the right passage. And what do they say they're planning to do? To break the fetters or chains of God and his Messiah, his anointed, so they can do whatever they want. What chains do the Father and Jesus have on the nations? Well, most nations have laws that support morality, for one. Laws that permit the gospel, for two. And they have laws that permit the word of God, for three. Additionally, the Jews have Jerusalem, Israel, and the Temple Mount pretty much under their control, the places where Jesus plans to return to rule and reign. So these are the things the nations might want to break. Without laws to reinforce biblical morality and permit the sharing of the Gospels and the Word, the nations might hope to silence God. So as we look for an agreement that matches Psalm 2, we need to look for it to give the world a system-wide power to do these sorts of things. Well, why do they want to do them? Well, to be honest with you, because the media is promoting all these things and pushing people in this way, making them angry, making the nations rage, making them want to ask for a vain thing. Media has had a massive influence on these type of things. Now, to change the laws about morality and to silence Christians and possibly God's word, and if the land of Israel was divided as a part of a peace deal that makes Saudi Arabia part of the Abraham Accords and allows sacrifices on the Temple Mount, the final point will be accomplished as well. So Psalm 2 certainly supports the idea that an agreement is coming, some sort of agreement, that will try to break the fetters of the Lord and his Messiah. So Psalm 2 then is going to shift focus to what God's reaction is. And what is God's reaction to the nations raging? He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury, saying, "But as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain." The word translated anger here is wrath, which is the second thing that we're going to see happening in Revelation. After the nations rage, God's reaction is to first laugh at the minuscule people trying to silence him, and he answers with his wrath. God then gives dominion of the nations to Jesus. He has installed his Messiah as king. This is what the 7th trumpet is all about. We ask, how important is this? It is so important. It is actually the catalyst for everything that happens in the end times according to Revelation. At the 7th trumpet, at the crowning of Jesus as king, the 24 elders quote Psalm 2 and show that Jesus' crowning is the resolution of all these things. Let's look at what they say because it helps explain Psalm 2 completely. You, speaking of Jesus, have taken your great power and begun to reign. We already saw God said, I have installed my Messiah as king in Jerusalem, in Zion. The 24 elders then recount everything that had already happened up to that point. The nations were enraged, and your wrath came, and the time came for the dead to be judged, and to reward your bondservants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name. So this 7th trumpet passage is about the fulfillment of Psalm 2. And as you see, the rage of the nations is the very first step that leads to Jesus eventually being installed in Zion and taking his great power and beginning to reign. And that's what the 7th trumpet is all about too. It recounts the steps that led up to the reign of Jesus. And it all begins with the nations raging. And that, of course, includes the kings taking counsel together, sitting in great assembly, a general assembly. So Psalm 2 is one of the most important prophecies in the whole Bible as it relates to what happens in the end times. If Psalm 2 talks about all the nations assembling and taking counsel, does this sound like a covenant with the many? Something worthy of being the event that kicks off the 70th week of Daniel, as we learn in Daniel 9:27. A covenant that's enforced upon the many. Yes, it certainly does, but is the timing right for this to be the covenant with the many? Because Daniel 9:27 indicates that the covenant is 7 years long, and it happens in the 70th week, so it should begin close to the beginning of a Hebrew year. Guess what? The summit of the future that's planned for September 23rd and 24th, 2024, is only 1 week prior to the start of a Hebraic secular year. So that fits perfectly as well. But I bet you'd like to hear what the UN actually says in their own words about 2024. And how might this work with the breaking of the fetters of God and his Messiah? Let's listen to what they had to say. The summit of the future is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. So once in a generation, they're planning something really big. To enhance cooperation on critical challenges and address gaps in global governance. They're looking to change the way that the world is governed. To reaffirm existing commitments, including to the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Now, if you've read about them, this means things like gender equality, climate change, and the UN catchphrase, peace and security. And the United Nations Charter. They plan to change the charter. Well, changing the charter changes all the rules. They can then change all kinds of things. For instance, they can make changes that allow them to recruit a standing army. They can change the makeup of the Security Council, which, are the guys that really call the shots, from nation states like the USA, China, Russia, to individuals. Maybe individuals from corporations, even a guy like this. A change in the charter can enforce world court decisions on morality. They can say what's right and wrong. They could intercede in international wars, etc. These are potentially enormous changes. 2024 will show what exact changes they are suggesting, because we really don't know, but we get a sense from these couple words that they've given us here on the kind of things they're looking at. So how does Psalm 2 end? With a warning that God gives these kings. Now therefore, O kings, show discernment. Take warning, O judges of the earth. Worship the Lord with reverence and rejoice with trembling. Do homage to the Son, that he not become angry, and you perish in the way, for his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are those who take refuge in him. Now there's a part of me that wants to read these last 3 verses in the General Assembly in 2024. Alas, controlling speech is also something that they're looking at doing. But what we just mentioned is worthy of an event that could launch the 70th week of Daniel and also be worthy to be mentioned in the discussion of a 7th trumpet in heaven. I'm sure you agree. We are talking about changes in world governance that have never occurred since the days of Nimrod at the Tower of Babel. So even if it isn't 2024, a future UN agreement of some sort will probably fulfill this prophecy. So we need to be keeping our eyes peeled on this group and their agendas. If you'd like to know more about the specific agreement that we've been talking about that's going to happen in 2024, click right here to keep watching and see a video that provides more details about what the UN is planning. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.